Welcome to my kitchen. I'm so excited to have you here today, and Santa is super excited too because today we are baking Santa's very favorite chocolate chip cookies. So before we get started mixing stuff together, there are a couple of things I want you to do to prepare. The first thing we want to do so that we get the cookies to the right texture for Santa, you want to set your eggs out so that they can get to room temperature. Now if you forgot to do that, that's perfectly okay. Just put them in a bowl with a little bit of mildly warm water and they will get to room temperature in just a matter of 5 minutes or so. The second thing we want to do is have a grown-up melt the butter. You can melt it so that it's completely liquid, but then let it cool for a little while because when you put it in, you don't want it to be hot. That can be dangerous. So once you have those things ready to go, we're ready to start mixing our ingredients together for the cookies. So the first thing we're going to do is get our 2 1/4 cup of flour, and we're going to put that into our big mixing bowl. And the next thing we're going to take is our cornstarch. Now cornstarch is our secret ingredient. It's what makes the cookies really chewy and thick like Santa really likes. So we just put that right into the flour. Make sure you get it all in there. And then next we have a teaspoon of baking soda and some salt. Now if you're using butter that has salt in it, you just cut the salt down in half. Otherwise put it in there. And you want to mix it up. And I like to use a whisk to mix up our dry ingredients because it just stirs them very nicely. You don't want to mix them too much because when you use a whisk, you're adding air into the mixture and too much air is going to give your cookies a different texture. So just mix it up enough, just like that. And then we're going to start on the wet ingredients. And to start, we have our brown sugar. Now it's okay if you use light brown sugar or dark brown sugar, whatever you have. As you know, elves like sugar a lot, so sometimes I go to get my brown sugar and I might not have the light sugar, so I use the dark sugar. It all depends on what they've gotten into. After you add in your brown sugar, you want to add in your 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. And then before I get any further, I like to just break up the brown sugar a little bit. It makes it easier for stirring everything else in. There we go, that's enough. Just get out some of those brown sugar clumps. Next, we're going to add in our melted butter. And again, make sure this is cooled enough so that it's not hot to the touch. There we go, right into the sugar. We're just gonna mix that up a little bit. And since the butter is melted and liquid like this, it mixes into the sugar really easily, which is great when you're baking with little kids because it's easier for them to stir and you don't need a mixer, which can get little fingers and things. So you can just mix this right up with your spatula. Just like that. You want to get it mixed really well because you don't want to have any sugar clumps, otherwise they won't bake very well in your cookies. So there we go, we've got it all mixed up with the butter and the sugar. This next part is just a little bit tricky, and I'm going to show you what I do. We want 1 whole egg and then an egg yolk. So whenever I have to deal with egg yolks, I start there, because that way if I mess it up, I haven't messed everything up. So it can be a little bit more difficult to get your egg yolk, but you're just going to crack your egg, and I suggest somebody older does this because it can get really messy really fast. So you just crack your egg, and you've got your egg yolk in the bottom half. Now we've got our egg yolk, which is separated. There we go, and we can just put that right in there. And we will set that aside, and then we add in 1 whole egg. And we're going to just mix that right up in there. And you want to get it just so that it's completely mixed so that when you add it into your dry ingredients, it mixes really well. All right, once we have it all mixed up, we're going to add this into our dry ingredients. And this sometimes can take a little bit of muscle because it gets a little bit hard to stir up, but we'll just take our time with it. One thing I learned, and it took me just dozens and dozens and dozens of decades baking with elves to figure out that if you lay a big towel across your table, all this gets so much easier to clean up. I usually end up with flour all over the table. If you put a towel down, you just wrap up the towel and you're done. All right, so we are going to mix this completely together. When it gets a little bit hard to stir, I have found that if you switch to a spoon, a metal spoon, it goes a little bit easier. All right, once you have it pretty well mixed up, the next thing you want to do is add in your chocolate chips. I use mini chocolate chips when I'm baking for Santa because every bite of cookie you take has a lot of chocolate just melted right into it, and Santa loves that. So I use the small chocolate chips and he gets lots of chocolate. I have found it easier if I just add about half at a time and then stir it up and then add in the rest. The last thing I do is add the vanilla, and that's because as much as Santa likes chocolate, I love vanilla. So the thing with vanilla is the more you stir it, it loses its flavor a little bit. So every time I have a recipe that calls for vanilla, I add it in at the very last step. That way it doesn't get stirred around too much and it keeps that really good vanilla flavor to it. So I just add that in last, and then we're just gonna mix this up really good. All right, once you have it all mixed up, the next thing you can do is put this in the refrigerator to chill for about 3 hours, or sometimes I put it in overnight. But that can be really hard when you have a bunch of little elves waiting around, or Santa waiting around for some cookies. So what I like to do, before I put it into the fridge to chill, I will go ahead and bake a dozen cookies. That way we have some while the dough is resting. So when you put your cookies together, you want to take about 2 tablespoons worth of dough, and I don't measure it. After baking so many cookies, you just kind of get used to it. But it's about a ball that size in the palm of your hand. And make sure your hands are washed before you do this, because you're going to get right into that cookie dough. So we're going to take the cookie dough and make a ball. Now when you put your cookies into the oven, when you put them on the baking sheet, cookies flatten out when they cook. So what I like to do when I'm making my ball is, instead of making it completely round, do the last few like that, so we have almost more like a barrel shape of the cookie. And then we just will put that onto our cookie sheet. So once you have all of your cookies on the baking sheet, you're going to get a grown-up, because a grown-up has to do every part with the oven. You want to put it into your oven, which should be preheated to 325. That's 165 Celsius. And we're going to put it into our oven for about 12 minutes. You want to keep an eye on it, because all ovens are different, so they'll cook a little bit differently. You don't want your cookies overcooked. So after they have baked for 12 minutes, take a look, and if they're done, get a grown-up, pull your cookies out of the oven, and there you have them. You want to let them sit on the baking sheet for about 5 minutes before you move them. That way they have time to cool down and firm up for a little bit. After they've cooled, you have your cookies ready to go, and you can just put them on a plate to finish cooling some more. And then you're ready to go with Santa's favorite chocolate chip cookies.